Lady Catherine Wetherell entered the ballroom certain of one thing: Lord Henry was meant for her. But when he walked past her, without a glance, and stopped before her maid, Eliza froze. She didn't curtsy, she didn't smile, she just stood there, wide-eyed, as the prince bowed and held her hand when she tried to pull away. Catherine's breath caught. The ballroom didn't fall silent, but something inside her did. Lady Catherine Wetherell had never bowed to anyone, and she wasn't about to start with a footman. The roads to Rosehearth Estate lay quiet under a pale morning sky, the kind of morning that smelled faintly of wood smoke and frost. Coaches rolled slowly over cobbled paths, wheels thudding softly through the lingering mist. Within the grand estates of the English countryside, titles ruled lives as surely as bloodlines did. Everyone knew their place, from the servant polishing brass railings to the daughter of a duke choosing suitors like fruits at market. At the top of this rigid world stood Lady Catherine Wetherell, Duchess of Avonshire by birth and temperament. She did not walk, she entered. She did not speak, she declared. She believed in three things without doubt: her own unmatched beauty, the superiority of noble blood, and the utter uselessness of common men. Today she waited in the drawing-room of Ashgrove Hall, a borrowed estate owned by her godmother, where she had retired from London's balls, to think, as she told the Ton. In truth, she was bored of being admired, bored of proposals from second sons, and bored most of all by the people who served her, especially the quiet new footman who never seemed to fumble, never looked her in the eye, and never offered her anything but distant obedience. His name, as far as the household knew, was Henry. He had arrived 2 weeks prior, carrying only a plain bag and a letter of recommendation signed by someone respectable enough to avoid questions. The head butler took him on without protest. His hands were smooth, the kind not earned by lifting trunks or scrubbing marble floors. His speech was plain, practiced, his gaze downcast, almost too perfectly humble. He blended in, but only if no one looked too closely. Lady Catherine had noticed him the way one notices a dull-coloured bird in a flock, with momentary curiosity, then indifference. She had called him "you" for the first 3 days, and Henry on the 4th, when he handed her a shawl without being asked. "Do not linger," she said sharply. He bowed. "Yes, my lady." His voice was low, even, no apology, no hesitation, just those eyes, dark, steady, and older than they should have been. 2 maids giggled about him behind kitchen doors. The cook said he looked more like a soldier than a servant, but no one asked where he came from. He worked too hard for that. No one except Eliza, Lady Catherine's maid, who had been the first to see the tear in the lining of his coat, a coat too finely stitched for a footman. She didn't speak of it, just fixed it quietly when he wasn't looking, folding the repaired fabric as if it were a secret itself. "Henry," Lady Catherine said, not looking up from her embroidery hoop, "do you know why a man lowers his eyes?" He paused beside the tea tray, careful not to rattle the cups. "To show respect, my lady." She glanced at him then, sharp, testing. "Wrong. It's to hide something." There was silence, broken only by the ticking of the mantel clock and the hiss of the fire. He didn't defend himself, nor did he smile. He simply placed the silver tongs beside the sugar bowl and stepped back. She studied him like one might study a painting, looking for cracks. "You're too quiet," she said, as if it were a flaw. "A proper footman should speak when spoken to, but you—" She paused, her gaze narrowing. "You answer, not converse. It's unnerving." "I mean no offence, my lady," he said, bowing his head. "No, you wouldn't." Her voice cooled. "You haven't the nerve." That should have ended it. But something in his silence, in the way he neither flinched nor bristled, left her unsettled. She rose from her chair, the soft rustle of silk like wind over tall grass, and crossed the room to stand within arm's reach of him. She was not used to looking up at men, and yet here was a footman who made her do so. "Where did you learn to stand so straight?" she asked. "You hold your back like an officer." Henry met her gaze for the first time, not defiantly, not boldly, just directly. "My father was strict," he said. She blinked. "What was he?" "A gardener," he replied smoothly. She stepped back then, not because she believed him, but because she didn't. Her hand twitched, then steadied. "You may go." He bowed again. "Yes, my lady." She didn't watch him leave, not obviously, but she listened to every footstep as he disappeared down the hallway. And somewhere in the kitchen, Eliza, who had been polishing silver nearby, turned her head slightly, as if she'd just heard the wind shift direction. The next morning, Lady Catherine rose later than usual. The fire had not been lit in her chamber, the curtains not yet drawn, a fact she noted with cold displeasure. When Eliza entered, breathless and flustered, her cheeks pink from running up the servants' stairs, Catherine gave her a sharp look. "I trust there's a reason my comfort has been so egregiously delayed." Eliza curtsied. "Begging pardon, my lady. There was a spill in the back corridor. The staff were cleaning it before anyone slipped." Catherine sniffed. "See that it doesn't happen again." When she descended to the breakfast room, she found Henry already in place, waiting at the door like a statue. He bowed low, opened the door in silence, and said nothing as she passed. Catherine didn't speak either, but her eyes flicked briefly to his hands, gloved now, though the morning was mild. Breakfast was uneventful until the hallway, when her heel caught the edge of a rug and she stumbled. Instantly Henry was beside her, steadying her elbow with a firm, practiced hand. "You!" she snapped, jerking away. "Did I ask for your assistance?" "No, my lady," he said calmly. "But you looked in danger of falling." Her eyes narrowed. "And you presume to touch a duchess?" He bowed. "I would not presume, only intervene." She stared at him, lips parted, searching for a retort that never arrived. Then she turned and walked away, too quickly. It wasn't until she reached her chamber that she realized she still held his glove. She stared at it in her hand, soft leather, finely stitched, the inside lined with something richer than any footman could afford. She turned it over, saw the faint embossing near the wrist, a mark nearly faded, a crest. Her fingers tightened around it. "A thief," she whispered to herself. "He's stolen it." Downstairs, Eliza stood in the hallway with a silver tray and saw Henry watching the stairs. Their eyes met, and though he said nothing, she gave him a soft look. Not suspicion, but something warmer. She had seen the same crest days ago, and she had said nothing. That evening, the lamps in Ashgrove Hall flickered behind drawn curtains, casting long shadows against panelled walls. Supper was quiet. Catherine said little, her fingers toying with the silver edge of her fork while her thoughts chewed on the glove folded in her pocket. She watched Henry pour wine with the same careful silence he always wore. Too careful, too still, as if every movement had been rehearsed. "Tell me, Henry," she said suddenly, loud enough that the clink of cutlery halted. "Where did you say your last post was?" He straightened. "With the Marlowe estate, my lady. And before that, a merchant's house in Kent." Her smile was tight. "A merchant, yet you wear gloves lined with imported silk?" The room held its breath. Even the fire crackled quieter. Henry's pause was brief, but it was there. The gloves were a gift. "From whom?" He met her eyes. "A relative. Must be a generous relation. Do all gardeners' sons receive gifts from nobles?" Henry didn't reply. He didn't need to. The silence stretched long enough for her meaning to curdle the air. Eliza stood in the background, still as stone, her hands locked around the napkin she'd folded twice too many times. "You may go," Catherine said coldly, and the servants bowed and withdrew, all but Eliza, who hesitated until Catherine snapped, "I said go." When they were alone, Catherine drew the glove from her pocket and placed it gently beside her plate. "You left this behind," she said. Henry looked at it but didn't reach for it. He didn't answer. "I visited once," she continued, watching his face. "The barony estate near the coast. They had a library of French leather-bound volumes and a solarium with Spanish glass. Quite a place for someone of humble means." Still, he said nothing. His stillness was not cowardice. It was deliberate, the kind that comes from knowing the outcome and choosing not to interrupt it. "I should report this," she added softly. "Theft, deception, impersonation. Those are not light offences." He finally spoke. "Then you should, my lady." Catherine blinked. "You're not going to deny it?" Henry stepped forward just enough that the candlelight caught his features fully. "You've already decided what you want to believe. I see no use in protest." And with that, he bowed, deeply, with the grace of someone who had never needed to. As he turned to leave, his gaze flicked, just once, to Eliza, who stood half-hidden in the hallway shadows, eyes wide and breath held. He walked past her without a word, but she followed the silence he left like a thread. Upstairs, Catherine sat staring at the glove, her appetite gone. She had won the confrontation. She had proven him false. And yet her throat felt tight, and the room suddenly very cold. The rain began not long after supper, a slow, steady whisper against the tall windows of Ashgrove Hall. Most of the household had gone to bed. Catherine's candle still burned, but she hadn't moved from her seat by the window. She held the glove in her lap, turning it over and over with restless fingers. She had meant to feel triumphant. She had meant to put him in his place. Instead, she felt unsettled. Across the house, in the low servants' wing, Eliza moved quietly through the narrow corridor, a folded blanket in her arms. She stopped outside the small storage room Henry had been assigned, barely more than a converted cupboard with a cot, though he'd never complained. She knocked once. No answer. She opened the door slowly. He was there, seated on the edge of the cot, elbows on knees, staring at nothing. His coat hung on a peg. His gloves were folded beside him. The room smelled faintly of soap and damp wool. "I thought you might be cold," she said softly, holding out the blanket. He looked up, tired, not surprised. "Thank you." She stepped inside and placed the blanket beside him. "I heard what she said," Eliza added, "about the gloves, about the crest." He nodded once, saying nothing. "She's wrong, you know," Eliza said. "Even if you had stolen them, you don't act like someone desperate." His voice was quiet. "What do I act like?" She hesitated. "Someone who's hiding." He didn't flinch. "You're not wrong." Eliza sat on the stool near the wall, tucking her skirt beneath her knees. "It's none of my business, and I won't ask. But I know you're not a thief." He finally met her gaze. "Why?" She offered a faint smile. "Because when you caught her from falling, you looked at her like she was glass. Not like someone who owed you." The room was quiet for a long time. "I thought I could learn something here," he said finally, "about what matters." "You have," she said. "You've learned who sees you and who only sees what they want." He looked at her then, not just as the quiet maid who fetched towels and folded linens, but as a woman whose kindness had weight, whose words did not flatter, but held. "Good night, Eliza," he said. She stood, smoothing her apron. "Good night, Henry." She didn't close the door fully behind her, and when the rain grew heavier, he looked toward it and thought only of the warmth she'd left behind. By the third week at Ashgrove Hall, Henry knew the names of every servant, not because he was told to, but because he listened. He sat with the footman during late suppers in the shadowed servants' hall, where stale bread and weak tea were shared under dim lanterns. He joined the grooms on cool mornings when frost kissed the stable eaves, helping them lift tack heavier than most shoulders could bear. He offered to polish boots with Thomas, a boy of 17 with hands already gnarled from shoe-black and cold water. 8 pence a week, Thomas muttered once, not knowing Henry watched. To run like a dog and sleep beside the brooms. Henry said nothing, but later he gave the boy his own gloves, plain ones this time, with the stitching just strong enough to last through winter. He learned that indoor staff, the housemaids, valets and cooks, lived in a hierarchy even tighter than the family upstairs. The butler ruled the hall like a governor. The housekeeper, Mrs. Davies, feared no lord alive. The younger maids tiptoed more around her than the lady of the house. But it was the division between indoor and outdoor servants that struck him deepest. The indoor staff, though bound by tighter schedules and stricter codes, ate better. They were seen, spoken to, measured and ordered, but still acknowledged. The outdoor workers, stable hands, gardeners, groundskeepers, were ghosts in mud-stained boots. They weren't served at the same hour. Their work was forgotten unless it failed. Henry noticed. He spoke to the gardener, Joseph, a man with a back bent like a scythe. "How long have you been here?" "Since the old lord, before Lady Catherine ever sniffed the gates." "And you've never asked for anything more?" Joseph spat into the soil. "What would be the point? They see you once. After that, you're part of the hedges." At night, Henry lay in his cot and thought of his father, a baron who believed poverty was proof of laziness. Henry had never touched a sick chicken or shoveled soot from a chimney flue. Not until now, and every day he spent among them, wiping boots, splitting kindling, stitching tears in aprons. He understood more about how thin a man's pride could be when his coin pouch stayed empty. He spoke to no one about these thoughts, except Eliza. She didn't pry, but she listened like she heard things between silences. "I don't think they know how much you see," she said once as they gathered towels from the line. "I don't think they know how little they're seen," he replied. She blinked at him, then smiled. Not wide, but real. Later that night, Catherine summoned him. She was draped in wine-colored velvet, standing by the fireplace. She didn't sit. She didn't offer him to. "I've written to Lord Bellamy," she said. "He arrives in a week. He's a proper suitor." Henry bowed. "I see. You may want to press your coat," she added coolly. "Appearances matter." She turned, but before he left she said one more thing, too soft to be accidental. "I've noticed how you linger near Eliza. Be careful, servants get attached." Henry didn't reply, but when he stepped into the hall his hands were clenched. In the servants' wing, Eliza had just finished folding the linens. He didn't speak. He just picked up the last towel and placed it gently atop the stack. That night he slept worse than he had since arriving, because he wasn't sure anymore if he was still just observing. He might be belonging. The morning of Lord Bellamy's arrival, Ashgrove Hall pulsed with quiet tension. Footmen polished silver twice, even where it already gleamed. Fresh linens were laid in the guest wing. Catherine herself descended before breakfast, a rarity, in a gown of soft lilac and pearls at her throat. Her reflection stared back from the hall mirror, flawless and composed, but her hands trembled as she fixed her gloves. It had been months since anyone of Bellamy's rank had visited. Years since Catherine had felt the true heat of admiration on her skin. Lord Bellamy was handsome, unmarried, and the heir to an estate older than her own. If he chose her, the whispers would fade. Her position would be restored. It wasn't love she sought, it was preservation. When his coach finally rolled through the gates, the sound of it turned every head. He stepped out in full grandeur, tall, golden-haired, with a voice polished by Oxford tutors, and a smile that never quite reached his eyes. "Lady Catherine," he said, bowing just low enough to be respectful. "You've kept this place well." Catherine smiled, the kind that practiced in drawing-rooms and debutante seasons. "Ashgrove suits me." Henry stood among the assembled staff as Lord Bellamy's gaze swept over them, impersonal, dismissive. When their eyes met, the nobleman looked past him without recognition. A servant, not a threat. Later, while the household bustled to prepare for the evening dinner, Eliza found Henry in the stables, binding a cut on his hand with the edge of a torn kerchief. "Let me," she said gently, reaching for a fresh strip of cloth from her apron. "It's nothing," he murmured. "Even nothing can fester if ignored," she replied, and wrapped his hand with quiet focus. Her fingers brushed his wrist, light, respectful, but real. He watched her work in silence. Her hair was pinned messily. Her face held no makeup, only sincerity. "Thank you," he said as she tied the knot. She smiled. "You're always the one helping. Let someone return it now and then." From the far side of the stable door, unseen but not unheard, Catherine watched. Her eyes narrowed. That night, at the formal supper, Lord Bellamy held court with stories of travel and Parliament, sipping wine like it was ceremony. Catherine laughed in all the right places, leaned forward just so, her hand grazing his sleeve with studied effort. But he noticed none of it. He watched the walls, the art, the chandelier, admiring the house more than the hostess. Catherine's smile faltered only once. When Henry entered to serve the wine, she caught the faintest flicker of a look between him and Eliza. Not love, not yet, but something warm enough to feel dangerous. Later in the hallway she stopped Henry with a single word. "Wait." He turned. Her voice was low. "She's a maid. You remember that, don't you?" Henry didn't answer. "She won't be chosen," Catherine said, more to herself than to him. Still, he said nothing, just bowed and walked away. She remained in the corridor, cold creeping up her spine, because for the first time in her life, Catherine wasn't sure if beauty and breeding would be enough. And worse, she wasn't sure if they ever had been. The days that followed blurred with tension. Catherine hosted tea in the drawing-room for Lord Bellamy, arranged piano recitals in the evening, and led him on long walks through the hedge maze, as if each carefully orchestrated hour might bind his interest to her estate, her name, her. Henry watched it all from the edges. He polished the cutlery, folded the napkins, opened doors, and said nothing, but his eyes saw everything. One morning, while Bellamy lounged on the lawn reading Byron aloud, mostly to himself, Henry passed through the garden path and found Eliza kneeling beside a cracked stone basin. She was replanting violets the gardener had forgotten. Her hands were in the soil, bare and steady. "You know they'll just get trampled when the ladies come through," he said gently. "I know," she answered, "but maybe they'll bloom before that." He crouched beside her. She didn't flinch. "I've never met someone who worked so hard to fix what others ignore," he murmured. She glanced at him, sun touching the edge of her face. I think the world's full of broken things. I just want to be the kind that mends, not breaks." He looked at her, truly looked, and something in his chest gave. It was a small thing, a blink of realization, that she had no idea who he was, and yet she offered him more grace than those who bowed. He opened his mouth, meaning to say something, anything, but was interrupted by the sharp voice of Catherine. "There you are!" She stood on the path above them, posture flawless, eyes tight. "Eliza, the drawing room needs fresh linens, now!" Eliza rose without a word, brushing dirt from her skirt. As she passed Catherine, their eyes locked, not in hatred but understanding. They both knew something had shifted. Catherine waited until Eliza was gone. "She's not your equal," she said, voice low. "Whatever game you're playing, she won't win it." Henry met her gaze calmly. "Neither will you." Catherine's face paled. "You forget your place." "No," he said. "I think you're the one who's unsure of yours." The words hung like glass between them, sharp, glittering, and dangerous. That night, thunder growled on the horizon. In the servants' quarters, Henry sat by the low fire, hands folded. He wasn't pretending anymore, not even to himself. He was falling for someone who didn't know his name, and the girl who once demanded his gaze might now be the one most desperate to look away. He stood and stepped outside, into the wind. Somewhere behind him, Eliza closed her eyes over folded linen, and Catherine sat before a mirror, brushing hair that wouldn't stay perfect. And above them all, the storm finally broke. The storm passed, but the air inside Ashgrove Hall stayed heavy, like a breath held too long. 2 days later, Lord Bellamy prepared to leave. His interest had dwindled as Catherine had feared. He cited business in the city, but his glance at the hedge maze was longer than the one he gave her hand. Catherine watched his carriage roll away with a hollow sort of grace, fingers clenched behind her back. The whisper of defeat scratched at her pride like dry thorns. She turned sharply and called for wine, and for Henry to bring it. When he arrived, she didn't ask him to pour. She gestured to the chair across from her in the drawing room. "Sit." He hesitated, just for a second, then obeyed. "You said I wouldn't win," she began. "But I see now. You didn't mean Bellamy." Henry didn't answer. Catherine studied him. "You're different from the others. I knew that the first week. You're too polished, too quiet. And your hands," she leaned forward, voice tight, "they're not servants' hands. They've never scrubbed a hearth or loaded a coal cart. I've kissed barons with rougher palms." Still, Henry said nothing. "I saw the letter," she continued, reaching for a folded paper from a drawer. "It arrived this morning, from the royal court, addressed to your family estate. I opened it." He stood. "You had no right." "I had every right," she snapped, rising with him. "You've lied to this house, to me, pretending to be one of them. For what? Sport? Shame?" Her eyes burned. "Do you know what they'll say when they find out I flirted with a servant, only to learn he was a prince in disguise? That I begged for crumbs from someone who could have offered the world?" Henry's face was stone. "It was never about you." But Catherine stepped forward, breath catching. "Then why her?" He blinked. "That girl with dirt on her hem and wind in her hair, that maid who didn't even know your name, why does she get what I never could?" His answer came softly. "Because she never asked for anything but honesty." Silence wrapped the room like velvet. Catherine's hands shook. She let the letter fall. "You're going to break her heart," she whispered, "when she finds out what you are." Henry met her gaze. "Then I hope she breaks mine first." He left the room without another word, the door clicking shut behind him. Catherine stood alone, not just passed over but exposed, and for the first time she realized he hadn't chosen Eliza to shame her. He had chosen her because Eliza was the only one who never looked down on anyone, not even him. The next morning broke crisp and pale, the kind of morning that carried secrets on its breath. Eliza walked the gravel path toward the orchard, apron bundled with linens for mending. She liked the quiet there, the way the trees hushed the world and let her think. But today, the quiet cracked. 2 other maids stood near the garden wall, whispering fiercely, a letter clutched in one hand. Eliza paused as their voices carried. Addressed to a Lord Henry Godwin, a prince, here, in disguise, and Lady Catherine's the one who found out, opened it herself. Eliza's hands stilled. She stepped forward slowly. "What did you say?" The younger maid's face flushed. It's nothing, just gossip." But Eliza didn't need more. She turned, the linen slipping from her arms, and walked back to the hall, faster with every step.
She found him not in the servants' wing, but outside, near the stables. He was brushing one of the mares, sleeves rolled up, the same plain shirt he'd always worn. Only now, it looked like a costume. "You lied to me," she said, her voice low but steady. He turned, slowly, and set the brush aside. "Eliza, you're not a footman," she said. "You're a prince." He didn't deny it. "I'm sorry," he said. "For what?" she whispered. "For lying, or for letting me believe I knew you?" His silence answered both. She shook her head. "All this time I thought you stayed because you saw me, because I mattered." "You do," he said, stepping closer. "You matter more than why hide who you are?" Her voice cracked. "Was I just some experiment? A kindness to pass the time while you played poor?" "No," he said sharply. "I came here to understand the lives of the people I'll one day lead. I wanted to serve, not observe. To feel the weight of every day, not just read about it." She stared at him, pain thick behind her eyes. "Then you should have started by telling the truth." He reached for her hand, but she stepped back. "I need to think," she said, barely above a whisper. Then she turned and walked away. Not quickly, but like someone learning how to leave a place they once thought safe. Henry didn't follow, because for all his titles, he didn't know how to fix a heart he'd broken without ever meaning to. And Eliza, who had never asked for anything, now wanted only one thing: distance. By noon, word had spread like fire through dry grass. A prince had lived among them, in the servants' quarters, in simple clothes, and Lady Catherine had discovered him. Servants talked in hushed tones. The steward locked the wine cellar. The housekeeper double-checked every curtain. It was as though royalty had burned the rules and left only questions behind. Catherine, however, walked as if already crowned. She wore her finest gown, a deep emerald that turned her eyes fierce. She summoned the butler. "Have the guests assembled in the West Hall. I will make an announcement." When Henry entered, the room hushed. He wore no uniform now, only a dark coat with silver buttons, tailored and clean. It fit him differently, as if it had been waiting for this day. Catherine stepped forward, her voice clear. "May I present to you Lord Henry Godwin of Arrowmore, a prince by birth, a leader by right." Murmurs rippled through the gathered servants and staff. Henry bowed slightly. "Thank you, Lady Catherine." Her smile flickered at the edge. "You honor us with your presence." "I honor the people I came to understand," he said evenly. "Not with speeches, but with time." She held out her hand. "Then let us begin a new season, together. Ashgrove would flourish under our shared name." For a moment, the room stilled. Then Henry said, "No." Catherine blinked. "I beg your pardon?" "I came here to see what mattered," he said, voice firm but not cruel. "To listen, to feel. And what I learned is this." He looked past her across the room toward the door where Eliza had just appeared, unaware that the eyes of the hall would follow. "Titles mean nothing," he continued. "Not if they blind us to who stands quietly beside us." Eliza froze. Catherine's voice broke. "You would choose her?" Henry's answer was soft. "I already did." Eliza turned to leave, but he crossed the room swiftly, stopping her with a hand to her wrist. Light, asking. She didn't pull away, but she didn't speak either. The silence was louder than any declaration. Behind them, Catherine stood as still as stone. No one applauded. No one moved. She wasn't just denied. She was forgotten. And in the eyes of the people she once ruled, she was no longer the brightest thing in the room. The hall cleared slowly, as if the silence had made ghosts of them all. Henry stood beside Eliza in the corridor now, far from the gaze of the assembled house. Neither spoke at first. Words had already done enough damage. It was Eliza who broke the quiet. "You didn't owe me anything." "I did," he said. "I owed you the truth. The first time you mended my coat." She looked down. "I thought you stole it." "I know," he smiled gently. "You weren't wrong to think it. I was hiding." There was a long pause. Then she said, "So, what happens now?" He reached into his coat pocket and pulled something out. Not a ring, but a small ribbon. Her ribbon. The one she'd tied in the garden weeks ago when the wind was high and laughter had come easy. "I kept it," he said, "because it reminded me what was real." She took it slowly. Her fingers brushed his, and neither pulled away. "I'll be leaving Ashgrove," he said quietly. "There's too much attention now, but not because I'm ashamed, because I've seen what matters." He looked at her, waiting. Eliza nodded once. "I don't want to be chosen because I'm kind. I want to be chosen because I'm enough. You are, he said. She smiled, the kind that didn't need an audience. A week later, Henry left Ashgrove Hall, but not alone. He left behind a title, a uniform, and a woman who still stared into mirrors, trying to understand where it all went wrong. Catherine would recover in her way. She always did. But something in her would never quite settle again, because she had seen what real love looked like, and realized it would never wear the crown she chased. Eliza and Henry settled far from the estate, in a quiet home with open windows and no need for masks. He ruled nothing, she ruled no one. But together they built something stronger than lineage or land, a life not based on status, but on choice. And that, in the end, was what made them noble.